Okay, great. All right. So thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to attend our first ever virtual drill core shack. For those that don't know, my name is Tony Retta. I am the CEO and co-founder and director of Tectonic Metals. With me today, I do have Peter Cleespies, our vice president of exploration, and also with me on the technical, actually we have a few people, sorry. Also with me today, technical side and directly from Flat is Trent Newkirk, our director of exploration. Trent's going to give a little presentation directly from the actual drill core shack up at the Flat Gold project. We do have our presentation that I am sharing here that Pete and the three of us will speak to. Also on our technical team, we do have Dr. Richard Goldfarb, our newest appointed technical advisor, and also with him is Ian and Michael, part of Tech Geological, also on the Tectonic's technical advisory board. They are all here to contribute in any which way possible. Other members from the Tectonic team include our board of directors, some of our board of directors, our chair, Alison Rippon Armstrong, John Armstrong, Michael Roper or Mick Roper, Joe Perkins, and I believe there might be a few others. We've tried to rally the entire team to be present and available to answer any questions here. My apologies if I missed anyone else on our team. Mark Smith, our technical advisor and engineer, is also on the call with us here. And so the way this is going to go down is I'm going to speak to some of the slides here. We have the drill core images that were in the news release that was recently announced. So we'll go through some of those highlights. In addition to that, we have Trent that will give you a tour of our core shack facility, the process that's involved when drill core comes into the core shack. And if we have some time, we're also going to show you some real live core from the 2025 phase 2 drill program, which has been kicked off. There will be a Q&A period throughout the session today. I'll probably segment it into parts, and after each part, we'll do 2 or 3 questions. We want to be cognizant of everyone's time, trying to keep it to. We have 2 hours booked, but don't fret. We'll probably try to keep it around an hour. If there's more dialogue or good dialogue, we're here available to extend that to an hour and a half or even 2 hours if need be. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we, with this sort of virtual drill core shack, we wanted to simulate what would transpire if you were to come directly to site. Not everyone has the privilege to have the ability to come up to Flat, Alaska and do a tour. But one of the things that we always try to do with every site visit is really talk about the rocks, what's coming out of the ground. Gathering around a core shack is for me, it's one of the best experiences when I go visit a site. It really gets the geos talking about what they're seeing, what they're observing. And it's something that we wanted to emulate here virtually for the entire Tectonic community, if you will. So we also want to foster organic conversation. Following a script is, for some people that works fine. I'm kind of an off the cuff kind of guy. I love being authentic. I love just like if we could have a virtual beer or coffee, just sit around the core shack and the rocks and have a yarn or two about what we're seeing, debate certain things. Hence why we invited my entire team to come live here with us and join us. So to that point, if you have a question, there is a feature to raise your hand. For those that aren't familiar with Zoom, if you scroll to your window, there's 3 dots. You go to the dots, and there is a feature that's I think it's called reactions. And again, Jesse or anyone else from your team, if I get this wrong, please jump in. But you can put up your hand, and we'll try to call upon you. There is also a chat area. And what we'd like you to do, if you have a question, note the slide number, say slide 13, and then write your question there. try to raise your hand. You don't have to do all these things, but it's something that will facilitate sort of, I believe, ease and efficiency, and allowing us to have kind of a cohesive, time efficient webcast here. So those are some things to consider. If you don't want to do that, put up your hand. We'll try to get to you. We do have a pretty robust attendance here. We're pushing probably over 70 or 80 people now. So trying to manage everyone, it will be a little bit difficult if you don't put up your hand. Everyone is inherently muted to allow us to speak effectively and communicate. We will unmute you when you put up your hand, and then either keep you engaged if need be, or mute you back to allow for the next person to foster conversation. Okay, so with all being said, I'm going to ask if we can. I think hopefully Jesse, you can take. We're doing things live here too, so Jesse, if you can just deal with Trent's request, that'd be great through Teams there. And we'll kick things off. And again, just remind me if you can't see the presentation or slides aren't changing. This presentation or this virtual core shack is centered around mostly, except for the live bit that we just threw in about looking at some phase 2 drill core at the end if there's some time. But this is really centered around phase 1 drilling. We executed this program on May 30th. The first drill hole was locked in on that day and pulling out core. And it was a program that involved 48 holes, over 7,700 meters. And we'll get into the diamond and RC components of that. What you're looking at here on the screen is a diamond drilled, positioned at flat, pulling out core from that phase 1 program. I do draw your attention to the slide. It was the forward-looking disclaimer shown here on this slide. It's also in our news release. It is here for a reason. I would like to highlight this. I'm not going to read this in its entirety, but I do want to highlight this section here that I've highlighted with my mouse, if you can see that. And I'll just read it just to make sure we're all fully aware of what's transpiring here today. So in addition, this news release or presentation contains photographs, detailed geological notes, descriptive observations such as alteration styles, mineralogy, and visible gold. These observations are preliminary in nature, may not be representative of the entire interval or system, and should not be relied upon as a guarantee of mineralized assay results or as the basis for any investment decision. Investors, readers, and industry are cautioned that the visual estimates, core photographs, and geological descriptions are not substitutes for accredited laboratory assay results and do not demonstrate the economic viability of any mineral deposit, or would also add of mineralization. So these are observations, especially when you're going into an area that's never been drilled before, where you don't have a foundation to assess, does this run, is this mineralized, is this not? We have to exercise caution. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware that these are visible observations, and this conversation is centered around visuals, not specific assay results. I mentioned there's a lot of people from our team here today. We do have a very healthy and diverse skill set. I think what makes any junior mining company successful, geology is extremely important. Knowing what a mine looks like, so engineers, miners, things of that nature. You need the capital markets to feed the team or be the gas for the vehicle to keep it running, meeting its objectives. So these are all facets of a company that are extremely important. I mentioned here we have Allison, we have myself, John Armstrong, Joe Perkins, Mick Roper, Peter Cleespies, Mark Smith, Dr. Ian Basson, Michael McCall, and Dr. Richard Goldfarb. I'm not going to take the time to go into the specifics about each individual member, but what I will say is that everyone's handpicked for a purpose. We don't need 10 geologists. What we need is, we need geology, but we need the other facets that really go into identifying what a mine is and how do you identify that early on. So I'm very fortunate and honored and humbled to have such leaders in their various skill sets, pushing or towing the line with Tectonic here and with us today. This will be specifically a technical conversation. So I'm not going to belabor any of the corporate stuff too much. I wanted to show a location map of where we're situated. Obviously, we're in Alaska, but we're also in this mineral belt called the Kuskokwim, which happens to host the fifth largest undeveloped deposit in the world, i.e. Donlin, currently now owned by NovaGold and Paulson, one permit away from being fully a permitted opportunity. And NovaGold and Paulson have gone on record stating that they expect that final permit in 2026 or 2027. That is a refractory deposit, and it is 40 million ounces approximately. Flat appears to be or is on the opposite side of the spectrum as a heap leach or a free milling opportunity. Much different capex and energy requirements than, say, a refractory deposit. This year has been transformative on many fronts, more specifically on the capital raising. I had one banker industry friend approach me recently, and he wasn't staying fully focused on the Tectonic story. They typically focus on more blue chip or production type companies. And his text to me, I'll never forget. It was like, "What the hell did I miss here? You went from $5 to $7 million capital raises to $35 million. What's going on?" And really, I think what's transpired is the Alpha Bowl discovery that we announced in March of this year. It was drilled in 2024. That in addition, perhaps with Paulson moving into NovaGold itching closer to that sort of fully permitted production scenario. We're in a $3,500 plus gold environment. We also have a movement by not only investors, but by majors coming back to North America, this movement by governments and countries for homegrown resources. And all of that, I think, and also the major mining companies really taking advantage of this current gold price where they're making a lot of capital. So that provided a backdrop for Tectonic really to sort of shine, especially amongst its, I would say, against the competition or our peers. So that $35 million has given us the ability to launch that phase one, 3 drills, 7,700 plus meters. And then now we have over 20 million in the phase two financing to keep those drills turning. And we'll be putting out a detailed news release on the objective of that phase two. But all of that, it's not predicated on my good looks or speaking capabilities. It's predicated specifically on, I would say, the Flat Gold Project and our partnership with Doyon Limited. I think Doyon is the landowner, one of Alaska's largest native corporations. Those contributing factors has really brought this to the forefront. The flat opportunity is one that's very unique in this day and age, I would say, to have this sort of gold endowment in a first world or in a first world jurisdiction is very rare. And we have visibility for something that could literally be Donlin size, and we'll talk a bit about that. And so people are finally catching on. Before Tectonic was around or working the Flat Gold Project, Flat became very well known because of its placer endowment. And that's what you're looking at here on the screen on the left is an aerial view. Those pink lines represent placer gold shedding from these intrusion targets. Over 1.4 million ounces of recorded placer gold production from the early 1900s right through to close to 2000 plus, and still some activity happening to this day. But that placer gold came from somewhere. This is an unglaciated terrain. The soils work terrifically, 100% drill success rate. But the fact that we have this placer or free gold tells us that this is a free milling opportunity, and B, this is a very mineral rich environment. On the far right, we have our geophysics highlighting each one of these intrusion targets, and there's 6 of them. And then in the middle, the geology map that we're currently refining, things of that nature. And I'm going to ask Peter to come in and talk a bit about the geology map and some of these other pictures here to give a bit more context from the geological side of things. Pete?
Good, thanks, Tony. Good morning, everybody. I think the salient features on these figures is really the the geology and what we are drilling. We've referred to it as the flat sort of intrusive volcanic complex, which is a series of monzonitic, mostly intrusions, related volcanic rocks, and associated hornfels rocks. And we're drilling primarily the intrusive parts of this system. And overall, the complex is signified by like low resistivity. On the far right is the 7200 hertz EM, and you can see the sort of deep blue. And each one of those deep blue bodies is comprised of intrusive rocks, volcanics, and or hornfels. So you can see that sort of the magnitude of the system that we're chasing from Chicken Mountain in the south up to Caribou at the north.
Thank you, Pete. Would you like to continue, please, Pete?
Yeah, so here, often you'll read in the literature in our press releases that, we're chasing the reduced intrusion related gold system, such as Fort Knox or Snowline's Rogue. And it's interesting in that what we see at flat does bear resemblance to the rig system, particularly from the aspect of the sort of zonation of the metals and vein types as you move away from the what appear to be the core of the mineralized systems. So you're basically seeing, gold, bismuth, tellurium bearing veins in the central part, and as you move outwards, you start seeing other mineral assemblages, particularly the arsenic, antimony, a bit more mercury. We don't really see the lead, zinc, and so as we go through this presentation, you'll see these different vein types that are often superimposed. So what this is sort of telling us or suggesting is that, we're seeing like multiple phases telescoping over printing of, ongoing, I guess, mineralization events. The other thing that I'll point out is that we are starting to see a few more sort of chalcopyrite bearing veins in the alpha bowl, which sort of suggests that maybe this isn't a pure rigs, could be a hybrid, or clearly a sort of a orogenic intrusion hosted gold system. So we're using the rigs more as a sort of exploration guide rather than a strict vectoring tool.
Yeah, and I think that's very important to note, Peter, is that obviously subscribing to a model can be beneficial to some extent, but subscribing to finding gold is even more important. And if you look at our team, there's a wide, sorry, there's a wide array of geological talent, but experiences and different philosophies and approach to finding gold. And I think that's one of the key differentiators, that if you want to be successful in finding something, having blinders on can be sometimes detrimental to that success. But having people pull experiences and knowledge from different deposit styles to really unravel and figure out what this is, I think is a differentiator and extremely beneficial. And I think that's what the Tectonic brings to the table. So this is simply a guide for the moment. And there's elements where we can apply it and see things that are like, oh yeah, this makes sense. It looks like this. And then there's times where we're questioning the model. And I think that's all very healthy. And this year's drilling has really brought forward different geological observations. Things that weren't known in the past or observed in the past are now coming to the forefront. And that's one of the things that gets me really excited about this year's program, because we now actually have drill core from multiple areas. And, RC chips is great as a compliant NI 43-101 tool, but in the same breath, drill core gives us the ability to really see what's happening below the Earth's surface. And although gold assays are obviously coveted, the geochemical, the other elements associated with that gold, the other elements that show up when you do like multi-element assaying, is really the DNA for a deposit. It's the genes and the DNA. So I'm excited to see the gold 100%. Obviously, we want that to be as high as possible, but in the same breath, getting the other multi-elements associated with that gold is really going to help us figure out what the heck this really, what is this, and how do we find more of it. And so that's going to be a key component that sometimes doesn't necessarily get issued in news releases, but super important to to figuring out what the flat gold system's all about. Okay, one of the things that we had to do, with just as a reminder too, this is our third year of drilling, but the previous years of drilling were not as many meters and function of capital markets and things of that nature. So we've expanded significantly the camp size and also our core facility. You're looking at a brand new core shack that was built. It's now populated with drill core, and I think this is a great time to, again, if you're at up at site, what we like to do is actually walk you through the protocols that we do to ensure that we're capturing and logging the core correctly. And with that in mind, I'm going to pass this to Trent Newkirk, who's our director of exploration, live at site in the new drill core facility, to walk you through some of the protocols and also some of the latest core. Trent, over to you, please.
All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, like Tony said, I'm up here at Flat Site working in northern latitudes. At this time of day, when we kind of gather, I could show you stuff outside, but it's pitch black outside. If you could,
Trent, we just lost your video. Or your camera, I should say. There you go. You're back.
Yeah. All right. I can't really see myself, so I'm just. Is it pointing at me or the outside?
We can see you.
Okay. Let me share my camera. Yes. So here's what we're looking at.
Great.
So here we go.
Thank you.
So working at northern latitudes, like I was saying, outside right now, pitch black. We just are actually in the process of constructing a brand new core cutting facility. But here's our new outfit. What happens on the day we're drilling way up to the north? Core will get slung down in these baskets, and we load them into our new core logging facility. And here when we first get in, we'll come in and do our RQD process and change over the block from feet to meters and check out our recoveries and do our RQD logging, looking at veins, fracture frequency, rock quality. And as we're logging it, we start to identify the veins, structures, and we do quick logs. And that's what we can report daily to executive management. And then we start the logging process. The logging process, we go through, we validate our collar locations, and then we go through and look at the oxidation, lithology, keying on if we're seeing patterns in alteration, looking at veining, overall mineralization. And at that point, we'll identify these things. We go through, make little notes of where things are. Our geologists will come through, and we have a new tool. It's called the StructMaster, and we digitally log structures, and we get the true depth and dip direction in real time of structural measurements. And so then we use those to help identify our drilling and looking for patterns for if we need to change orientations, or as our interpretation evolves, we have the data to accompany that. From then, after that, well, we sometimes identify units or veins that we use or like to get readings on. So in the field, we're using handheld XRFs to identify, potential concentrations of elements or metals, elements of notable concern: bismuth, tellurium, arsenic, antimony, and we add that into a daily quick log or our digital XRF logs, and then we report it, and we have our sample, and then we go through and we do our sampling, and we cut the core. to send it out for assay. The whole process takes, when we're fully staffed, several days upon completion of the drill hole. But we have a pretty, as we're growing, the process is getting quicker and quicker, and we are taking our time to figure out the geology in the best way possible. Other than with that being said, as we go further along in this presentation, we'll be able to come back, look at some of these rocks, and I can show you some of the stuff that we've identified, and just show you more along the process. But for seeing that it's already half past 6, to further get this further along, we'll keep going with the presentation with Pete and Tony to look at the rocks in the virtual core shack, and then we can come back here for further questions. Unless anyone has questions right now, I turn it back to Tony and Pete.
Yeah, thank you, Trent. And again, if anyone has any questions, we can take 1 or 2 right now before we move on to the next component. Jesse, I'll ask that if you see anyone with a hand or in the chat, just to give me a heads up, and we'll accommodate. Okay, that was great. Thank you, Trent.
Nope, no questions at the moment.
Yeah. All right, so let's keep motoring. I mentioned over 7,700 meters of drilling transpired in the phase 1, a combination of diamond and RC. I think we all know what those tools are, so I won't explain it. But in this, what I do want to add a bit of color is that these targets aren't 200 or 500 or even 700 meters wide. Alpha Bowl, for example, 1.5 kilometers by kilometer. A diamond drill core is great. You get that actual core. It's a lot slower, more costly. The RC drill is used as a tool to supplement that. It's, I call it a scout drill. When you have a large area, you want to test it somewhat relatively quickly and cost effectively. Your first pass or your follow-up pass can be that RC drill. It drills a hole a day. In certain areas here at Flat, sometimes we achieve 100 meters penetration or hole length. Sometimes it's a bit more. It can go up to 200 meters, but we're typically experiencing about 100 meters. And it's just a pierce point to collect data, geochemical data, and it's an NI 43-101 compliant tool. And so hence why we continue to use the RC, because it can evaluate these large areas quickly, especially where you don't have, for example, outcrop or something at surface. Alpha Bowl is relatively a blind area. Yes, we have this placer gold endowment, but in essence, you want to get coverage. RC can do the job, and it can do it quickly. So we're fans of it. And I wanted to highlight, there has been some inbound questions on mine, people reaching out to me, why the RC? So that's the rationale for it. It's not meant to replace diamond. It's a different tool. And so you can see here, these are the targets that we've tested. Again, these are not sort of small targets. They all have the potential to be a deposit, and they do represent not only a potential deposit, but a district scale deposit. These could, if this was in the public domain, I would envision, if this project or this land was in the public domain, I would envision one company possibly staking and acquiring and working each one of these. We're blessed by the fact that we have all these targets to ourselves, and it is a multi-deposit or multi-potential deposit system. Okay, we're going to zoom into Alpha Bowl here. Just for context too, the property position is 99,000 acres. You can see your scale. One of the first things I do when I look at a geological map, I hold right down to the scale. This is 500 meters. And you can see the area here, Alpha Bowl, that's denoted, again, 1 kilometer by 1.5 kilometers. Green represents the RC drilling. Red represents the diamond holes. Anything other than 2025 drilling is denoted with a black collar location. Pete, over to you, please.
Yeah, okay, so this map is going to be referenced throughout. The one on the left will be referenced throughout the presentation, showing where the location of the drill holes, which we have some core photos of. So you'll keep seeing this figure over and over the one on the left. Next slide, Tony.
Yeah. All right, oops, sorry. I'll tackle this one and just highlight, each area had an objective. So this massive area called Alpha Bowl hosts to 650,000 ounces of placer gold that was literally shedding out of this bowl. We wanted to find or further evaluate the bedrock source. Last year's drilling, the first ever drilling in the history of this project, transpired. It returned a hole that was it was RC, mineralized from top to bottom. I believe off the top of my head, it was about 66 meters at 1.24 grams per ton. But within that was some very high grade material, 20 plus gram per ton material, 2 gram per ton material. So we wanted to flush that out further. Let's figure out what the scale and the potential grade, and also a really important thing from a mining perspective, the continuity of the mineralization. So that was the objective of the phase one, to go in there and try to answer those questions: scale, grade, and continuity. How do we also do that? Oriented diamond drilling. That gives you real structural data that I can then feed into my structural advisors and others to say, okay, what is this true orientation? Are we drilling it in the correct manner? The outcome of that work, based without any assays right now, is that we have observed some different things: some chalcopyrite, some tourmaline, visible gold is present, some higher vein density, some thicker veins, if you will. Also, multi-generational veins, cross-cutting veins, sheeted veins, different colored veins, which could indicate, again, multiple pulses going through the system. There seems to be an overprinting sometimes in certain deposit areas worldwide. You get an initial pulse and it's a certain sort of mineralization style, and then there's an overprint, which is a different mineralization style. So we're seeing some overprinting, and then some strong sericite and potassic alteration associated with the mineral vein. So the objectives for phase one have been met at Alpha Bowl, and we're obviously very excited about what the potential might yield. And we do expect to be getting assays here very soon. So stay tuned on that front as the weeks go by. We're going to assume this is red. It was in the press release, so we're not going to belabor it here, and we're going to keep motoring to the actual drill core photos. And Pete's going to give us some, a quick synopsis on what we're seeing in the drill core. Over to you, Pete.
Great, thanks, Tony. I guess these first couple slides are just sort of kind of generic vein types that we see at Alpha Bowl. I think the first thing I want to point out is the photo on the left, the rock type. Mostly at Alpha Bowl is a relatively coarse, intrusive rock. It's probably monzonite to cyanomonzonite, just depending on the feldspar composition. But it is quite coarse grained, and quite often we see Schiller effect, which is indicating calcic plagioclases, or labradorite is common at Alpha Bowl. So typically the quartz veins are quite narrow. I mean, they're going to be millimeter to maybe a couple centimeters in scale, and they'll carry varying metal contents. This particular example is showing some chalcopyrite, which is relatively unique to Alpha Bowl thus far. And so you can see a close-up of a clot of arsenopyrite with a bit of pyrrhotite in the central photo, and on the far right is some smoky gray quartz where the core has broken along that vein, and also showing some chalcopyrite. Throughout these photos, you'll see that red line, which is the bottom of core orientation line, which is used to orient the core. So this particular vein is at a relatively shallow angle to the drilling direction. Next slide, Tony. The other,
And if anyone on the Tectonic team wants to chip in, feel free to again raise your hand or jump right in. Go ahead, Pete. Sorry.
So the other style of veining we see are what we call later stage veining. They generally tend to be composed of calcite and or like a fine white clay material. They're typically at a different orientation and cross-cutting the earlier. Oh, what happened here?
Sorry. There we go.
Yeah, like the quartz or quartz carbonate veins, and something again unique to Alpha Bowl. We're starting to see these pink, salmon pink sort of halos, which people are logging as potassic alteration. Not exactly sure if that's the case or, but that's what it's being logged at as. Okay, so the first few photos here are from hole CMD 25-004, which is the first core hole drilled at Alpha Bowl, and it's circled in yellow there, and it's drilled from, so our initial hole was drilled from east to west in this particular case. So next slide. So there you can see a couple boxes of core. Again, the coarse-grained sort of monzonite or intrusion, and we sort of, you can see a number of veins cross-cutting, and in this case it's a quartz carbonate vein with sort of sericite alteration halo, which gives it sort of a greenish hue. The sericite is significant in that it's basically alteration of the host rock, where everything's being the feldspars and the biotites are being replaced by sort of fine-grained white micas, which are likely fangites or potassic in their major cations, and they indicate relatively high fluid flows. Sort of that cooked up the rock as these fluids move through. And this little, quartz carbonate vein is displaying like brecciated textures, which is, indicative of that vein being reactivated, sealing up and breaking up, and more fluids passing through it. Next slide. Here's another example of a quartz vein within the same hole structure a little further down the hole. In this particular vein, it's white quartz, but it contains fairly coarse-grained, sort of brecciated arsenopyrite, which is commonly associated with gold in these systems. Next slide, Tony. So we'll move on to the second hole, CMD 25-005, which is basically drilled in a conjugate orientation to 04, but it's drilled from west to east along sort of a 110 azimuth. So again, the sort of same host rock. Again, examples of the sort of multi-phase sort of breccia veins are hosting arsenopyrite. This particular case, you can see like a number of them throughout the core there. But here you can see like the late stage clay vein cross-cutting the earlier brecciated quartz carbonate arsenopyrite vein. Next slide. Again, an example of sort of some larger veins with associated, strong to intense sericite alteration. You can see obliteration of most of the biotite. The rock takes on sort of a fine-grained greenish appearance. Some pretty significant vein structures, particularly within the strongest sericite altered sections. And then on the top, you can see that has been subsequently subjected to faulting and additional brecciation, which is post mineral, clearly. Next slide, Tony. Another example from hole 5, 6 boxes. Again, the relatively coarse-grained, intrusive rock. This one is showing some pretty decent, vein densities, and they appear to be centered around a larger sort of quartz carbonate vein, like in the central photo there. Most of them are relatively consistent in their orientation, but you can see some later veins and fracture systems cutting across at a shallower angle, which is typically what we see. Is that the earlier quartz veins are generally oriented sort of northeast, about 30 degrees, and then they're sort of cross-cut by these later carbonate and clay fractures and veins, which have more a northwest orientation. Next slide. This is a kind of a unique one. It's sort of a pinkish carbonate vein. It looks really quite late stage in terms of its texture. Also, you can see how the feldspars are gone to sort of a creamy green color, which is indicative of like pervasive sericite alteration throughout the system. And interestingly, this late stage carbonate veins do also carry mineralization um, uh, as salvages and margins to those veins. Next slide, please, Tony.
Okay.
Here's another example of a quartz dominant vein, sort of cross-cutting. This one has a clearly visible grain of gold occurring within the sericite alteration assemblage. We do see gold on occasion, but it's not terribly common. So we're always excited to get some visual confirmation that there is gold in the system. Next one, Tony. So move on to hole CMD 25007, which is the next fence south. Again, all these holes are now drilled from west to east based on your, I guess, initial structural measurements on the veins to ensure we're trying to hitting them squarely, rather than down dip. Okay, next. So again, fairly consistent coarse grain monzonite. Here you can see a number of veins cross cutting, and they are displaying some oxidation, which is commonly controlled by these veins. And this oxidation can be quite deep. We've noted it probably down to 400 meters. And it's largely sort of fracture controlled. A lot of these veins are sort of open and allow these, I guess, meteoric waters to circulate to a fairly deep level. This particular run has a lot of sort of coarse, blocky tourmaline in it, which is, I guess, found throughout the whole flat system, but in some of these holes, it's particularly prevalent. We're looking at it. Some of it looks like it's what we would call sort of late.
Pete, you're frozen. Trent, would you want to take over if till Pete comes back here?
Yeah, where are we? Yeah, so where you drilled this, let me just
We can.
find where we are.
Yeah, we're on slide 27. I think Pete was pretty much at the tail end of this, but
Yeah, so I mean, this is typical what we're seeing in Alpha Bowl. And then some of those veins that we're starting to see. And again, at the bottom of some of these holes, we start to see these thicker veins, and all consistent with the structural measurements that we've been identifying in kind of adjacent holes and throughout the system. Next slide, please.
Yeah, well, let's just okay. Well, what do you make of the tourmaline? I'm gonna jump in, and that's something that we haven't seen previously. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, we started to see like clots and just larger tourmaline, like cross-cutting. Well, there's a later lithology like that, like a cross-cutting unit, and then we see these clusters and kind of bunchy tourmaline like clusters. Other than being like what we think we know as it being fairly late, and these hydrous fluids coming through, showing that like the longevity and kind of the pulsating like later system is just long evolving, and we're showing, I guess, the complexity of the system, and that it's with the increased fluid flow and like the fluids that are coming through, that we the system is recharged late and altering into the rocks, and the fluids are permeating across some of these later lithologies. Other than it being kind of like this later, or just, you know, to us, it gives us the indication of a long-lived system. And, you know, these are one of these things that as we start to see it, we'll dive into it further. And when we talk to our experts, or like, you know, Rich Goldfarb or any of these things, we'll be able to take these out and identify them and see how this fits in the greater system. If someone like, if Rich wants to jump in on this, we would love to get his input on what this what actually means. And that's why we engage with the experts to help guide us if we don't, as they they have knowledge from systems across the globe, and have kind of been throughout these systems in the area.
Yeah,
No
Trent,
pressure.
Rich here. Tourmaline is very common worldwide in large gold deposits in oceanic rocks. You're out in the Kuskokwim, you got lots of marine sediments. The marine sediments are loaded with boron. Boron is very mobile. So depending which model you like for the flat area, if you want the fluids and gold to come out of the granites, those granites will have picked up a lot of the Kuskokwim sediment when the magma formed. So they would have a lot of boron. Alternatively, if those granites just metamorphose to country rocks and move those around, those would release boron. So boron is something you would expect in any kind of gold deposit that sits out in a metamorphic terrain of marine rocks. So it makes good sense. It should be there.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
Anyone,
so this
anyone else?
this actually well, so
Go ahead.
this is a good like back and forth, is that, you know, where we identify ourselves in like the Kuskokwim units, like the adjacent hornfells. This is one of those things where we are in the silicic or the package of the Kuskokwim seds and the adjacent rocks, because we know that the Kuskokwim is like a regressive sequence. It starts out, deep marine carbonaceous, and then it gets more and more silicic clastic as we go up. And some of the adjacent, or some of the units that we see, say north in the Jam area and Caribou, you get into the Hornfels Kuskokwim, and there are these more siliciclastic argillites, and you see some other more terrigenous fossils in them. So with that, I mean, that's good to know. Like as we go through this, we see the interaction. If it is the marine sediments, and we have these, these boroaluminum silicates that are precipitating out, or showing that the commingling, or the fluids that are interacting with both the magmatic bodies and their intruding sediments, that's a good place to be. I think, is that you have these hydrous fluids that are moving around, maybe scavenging metals or anything, but just showing that you have like these thermal cells or hydrothermal cells that are percolating up around and incorporating adjacent fluids. So that's thank you for the input.
Yeah, and you also emphasize hornfells, and that's very important. Those intrusions make those rocks very competent and fracture more easily. You look at Donlin Creek, some of the mineralization, that 30 million, 40 million ounces there, is sitting in the Dyke Sill complex, and the rest is in hornfells. Having hornfells around those intrusions gives you great competency contrast to put a lot of gold and fluid into those hornfells.
Yeah, then another good point is that where we do see this, and maybe adjacent to say where we have hornfelsing or interaction with the intercalated mafic units that seem to be like, they sit outside of our igneous complex, but there's these other fine-grained mafic volcanics and volcanic rocks, where mafic to intermediate. And this is some of those areas where we start to see more of some chalcopyrite and some of this stuff along veins and fractures. And as we keep drilling these systems, we keep learning more and more. So yeah, I really appreciate that input. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. So Trent, do you want to speak to this slide here, or Pete, if you're back?
Am I back?
You are back.
Okay, good. Yeah, again, it's an example of a larger quartz carbonate vein with within a sericite altered segment. I don't think this is a dike. It's, you can texturally, if you look at it closely, you can see the biotite's been replaced, but quite a strong vein and oxidation associated with that vein oxidized interval. Again, a bit more carbonate rich veining than we observe typically at Chicken Mountain is quite predominant in sections within the alpha bowl.
Okay. Over to you, Pete.
So again, another sort of section of core, showing one of these larger quartz carbonate veins, forming the center of a zone of sort of sheeted veining, throughout 6 boxes there or more. And again, these carbonate veins, they may be anchorite or ferrite dolomite, because they do tend to show oxidation quite preferentially over the other veins and rocks. So hole number 9. Again, it's a second hole in the second fence. This one basically shows a what appears to be dikes of a different composition, cross-cutting the finer grain dike, cross-cutting the coarser grain monzonite, veining in both units, and there's an example of some chalcopyrite within a quartz vein within the finer grained. We see both dikes within these rocks, and also xenoliths. And they often look quite similar, and you really have to get down and look at those sort of contact relationships to figure out exactly what they are. Slide hole 13 from Alpha Bowl. Again, this is so the coarser grained monzonite, sort of fairly fractured up. In this case, I think you can see a small dike or xenolith of finer grained material at the far right. But again, like very strong, oxidation and sort of in and around some noted quartz carbonate sulfide veins.
All right, just a couple more, Pete.
Basically, the similar to the previous slide. Again, you can see the finer grained, what appears to be a dike on the left-hand side, and these, strongly kind of oxidized, likely, carbonate-rich section adjacent to the dike. Commonly, these sort of, strongly oxidized carbonate vein zones are associated spatially, with the finer grained dikes. And I guess the last alpha bowl hole, 17, which is south, that we're starting to sort of impinge upon the northern part of Chicken Mountain. And what we observed there were some pretty, decent sort of quartz sulfide veins, getting a little thicker, often displaying like a Brett shaded textures, that sort of cracked seal or repeated opening. And we did note like visible gold on occasion within these veins. Next one, here's a larger vein. You can sort of noted, and you can definitely see the sort of multi-episodic sort of crack seal, brecciated nature of that vein, and again, speck of visible gold noted in that vein at 301.6 meters. Next one,
All
Tony.
right, that is, yeah, we're now moving into the Chicken Mountain, then we'll have Golden Apex at the tail end here. Just wanted to hit pause and see if there's any questions or comments from any of our audience or fellow Tectonic team members. Okay, why don't, Jesse, can you handle the Q&A, please?
Yeah, Kevin has a question from CrestCap. Given what you are seeing in the core to date, what do they plan to follow up on in phase 2 drilling? In other words, what do you see? Where do you see the strongest mineralization to date? I need to hop off at 920 Mountain Sharp. Quentin is on a plane and could not attend. Can you please publish a replay for him and everyone?
Okay, so given what you're seeing, and thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Jesse, for reading that. Well, regarding phase 2, I guess I'll address it right now. Phase 2 is predominantly focused on Chicken Mountain proper, if you will. We do intend to do, so we've done, for those that don't know, we've done some internal modeling for a potential mineral resource estimate. That modeling, in addition to other geological data, whether that's in drilling, surface, lineament, structural, geophysics. We did fly the property with a first ever sort of modern day drone mag survey. The geophysics, especially applied to when an inversion being applied to it, has been successful in helping us identify intrusive rocks that are potentially gold bearing. So with all that data in mind, we've kicked off phase 2 to target these areas within Chicken Mountain proper. That would help facilitate our first ever maiden resource estimate. The capital that went into phase 2 was predicated actually mostly on that initiative. That being said, we are getting or will be getting results from phase 1, and we do intend to be fluid with the phase 2 program, that if a result comes in from Alpha Bowl, Golden Apex, Black Creek, also Jam, which is an area that we drilled, we do want to move the drill quickly to that new area for follow-up. Although we don't have, we are very much dependent on the laboratories for when assays will be received. We've been given notice that we do anticipate to get initial assays very soon here. But the tail end of phase 1, we may not be able to get to those areas before phase 2 is over. But if something does come in with a meaningful assay, we will position the drill accordingly. But phase 2 is predominantly centered on pushing Chicken Mountain towards its first ever maiden inferred resource estimate. We aren't going to be using all the capital from phase 2, so we do have enough capital to kick off next year's campaign. This presentation is being recorded. We have to, for total transparency, because there are other people on this call. We may have to do some editing or things of that nature in order to make it legally available to everyone. So that's something we just need to get clarity on. Okay, any other questions or comments?
Yeah, we have another question from Mark Smith. He's just wondering where the Alpha Bowl discovery hole is in relation to the 2025 drilling.
Yes. So the Alpha Bowl discovery hole is in relationship to the drilling is a step out, and it's situated. I don't know if you can see my cursor. It's situated to the north. We did about just under a 200-meter step out, and we do anticipate going in and around that hole once access is given by the hopefully by the end of the season. For total clarity, that area is on land that's in the process of being conveyed, And while it's in the process of being conveyed, it is governed by BLN as far as access is concerned. Once that access is granted, we can go in there and flush that out. We were given access last year, so we do anticipate getting access fairly quickly here. So we'll we'll cap it off there for Alpha Bowl Q&A. There'll be more Q&A opportunities towards the end of Chicken Mountain and Golden Apex. We're going to keep motoring here to highlight the Chicken Mountain objectives for phase 1. As you probably all aware, we have done a comprehensive metallurgical testing that encompasses bottle roll testing, flotation, gravity and bottle roll. Those results were announced. Everything came back very positive, further reinforcing the notion that this is free milling. We followed up those metallurgical test results with our first ever column heap leach test results. Sorry, with our first ever heap leach column testing. Those results were announced. We were able to obtain 96 and 91% recovery on a 3/4 inch crush. The 3/4 inch crush, in essence, has the ability or the potential to represent a 3-stage crushing circuit. As hopefully some of we all know, crushing rock in order to liberate gold is probably roughly 50% of your all-in sustaining cost for any mining operation. So in essence, the less crushing you do, the higher the probability that you can obtain something that is lower in all-in sustaining cost. That also gives you the ability to process lower grade ore. So we want to continue with that metallurgical column testing, this time taking it even coarser to 2-inch crush. 2-inch crush, in essence, represents a 2-stage crushing circuit. So our goal is to inch our way towards potential run of mine. And a run of mine scenario like the mine in Alaska owned and operated by Kinross called Fort Knox, which also happens to be one of our analogs. They can process, I think the cutoff going to the pad there is 0.19. The average heap leach reserve grade is 0.3 grams per ton. They can do that for a multitude of reasons, one of them being run of mine. So we want to continue with our metallurgical initiative. When we get to the point of publishing our first ever maiden inferred resource, we want to marry that to a PEA, and having this type of data will provide context for what an ounce is worth. So the drilling done at Chicken Mountain was multifaceted. We wanted to collect core samples for 2-inch crush material, so we did larger diameter or PQ drilling. We also wanted to go into areas that we believed were potentially higher grade corridors, test that. Also go into those areas where we could potentially infill the gaps and fortify the modeling that would go into a potential maiden inferred. And these areas were selected for those key attributes, and also because they represent potential starter mining pits. That's where if you were doing a mining operation at Flat, you ask the question, where do you want your first shovel to go? And I got to tell you, that first shovel is going to go into your easiest and quickest payback material. So those were the areas that we identified. Again, our objectives and our those objectives were met and achieved. We did hit widespread, like what we believe is mineralized core. We also got better structural data to improve our targeting. And we do believe we've hit material that would be amenable to heap leaching. So with that being said, we'll look at some of the drill core. Again, we're going to assume that this is read. It's available on the website and in the news release. And over to you, Pete. Just noting that we want to keep things moving here fairly quickly, just for time.
All right, so the first one was our first met hole on Chicken Mountain, CMD 25-008. It's sort of drilled on the northern part of Chicken Mountain. And Tony, if you just get the slide. So this is typical of the rock seen on Chicken Mountain. The intrusion phase is quite a bit different than what we see at Alpha Bowl, being a relatively fine-grained leucocratic quartz to quartz biotite monzonite, which typically shows fairly, strong, pervasive sericite alteration throughout it. On this particular example, you can see, a number of these sort of quartz veins cross-cutting, very sheeted in their in their occurrence. And again, you can see the cut line or the or orientation line being the red line, and you can see those veins are being hit fairly square. That being bottom of core on that line. Okay, next one, Tony.
Okay.
So this is from CMD 25-012, which is our, I guess, our third metallurgical hole on Chicken Mountain further to the south. This is just sort of a raw photo from when the core first came in. Again, you can see a number of these sort of sheeted veins. One on the top there's particular interest. It is quite a large vein, and it does show like disseminated sulfide as a salvage to that vein, and it's sort of central crack seal. So again, sort of repeat activity on there. You can also see on the bottom half the oxidation we typically see that's largely controlled by the veins. It gets occluded on veins, and it also oxidizes along some of these veins, which tend to be open. And this last hole from Chicken Mountains, CMD 25016, is not a metallurgical hole. For Michael and Ian's benefit, this is like smack dab in the middle of what we call no man's land that we've all been looking at as being, so the potential intersection between sort of the Chicken Mountain structure and the added structure, and pretty happy with what we've seen in that one. Again, the host rock tends to be a fairly fine-grained quartz-biotite monzonite, but as you can see from this photo, is that there is relatively high vein densities throughout that entire hole, and they do have that sort of typically quartz veins, sheeted appearance, and structurally they are very similar to orientations that we see on Chicken Mountain proper, being probably averaging about 0.30 strike with maybe a 7-degree west dip to them. So overall, a really good result in that area. And here's another example further down the hole. Again, you can see the vein reasonable vein densities in there, and in this particular example, you can see the cross-cutting later sort of calcite / clay veins that are at a far shallower angle to the core axis. Again, something we typically see on Chicken Mountain proper as well. So it does appear that the main Chicken Mountain mineralized trend does sort of extend up into the no man's land area.
Okay, let's continue, and then we'll do Q&A at the end, Pete.
Okay.
Golden Apex.
Do you want to go over this, Tony?
Yes. Yes. Okay. So again, the Golden Apex being the intrusion to the north of Chicken Mountain, but also to the northeast of Alpha Bowl. Their relationship TBD, but Golden Apex is a 2.5 kilometer by 2.5 kilometer anomaly based on the geophysics. To Richard's point, Dr. Goldfarb, or Rich's point earlier, this is surrounded by Hornfels rocks, more of a distal expression, but also potentially could be a higher grade portion. There was a hole from 2003 that was drilled by one of the previous explorers that came back with mineralization. There's some 10 gram, 9 gram, 6 gram, some lower grade material. It was this black rock, possibly not correctly logged, but we've back in 2003, but we've had the opportunity to relog that drill hole. We obviously have assays from 2003. It was done by ALS, so we can look at this core and say, okay, what's the potential of this being mineralized? But there was enough gold tenor and intrigue for us to follow up on that 2003 hole and do a step out. And that step out was designed obviously to hit mineralization, but also to collect other geochemical markers, if you will, or indicators, and also get structural data. Back in the previous explorers didn't have the benefit of doing oriented diamond drilling, so structural or hitting these things at the appropriate angle was a little bit of a guessing game. So we wanted to collect structural data by doing diamond core drilling, step out, get that geochemical markers, also see what we're dealing with, and then use that data, structural, geochemical, gold, whatnot, to do future targeting on this target. We were very, I think, pleased with the outcome, and we'll talk a bit about with Pete. We'll just talk here quickly to what he or we are observing in the drill core.
All right, so CMD 25-006, the golden apex. Golden apex is a target where we believe that there is some intrusion within that golden apex block. It's largely like a hornfels or volcanic rock exposed on the surface. It is offset by a major sort of east-northeast structure from the main sort of Chicken Mountain alpha bowl. And so we're sort of drilling in here, looking at potentially like hornfels related mineralization, but also to look for this intrusion that is interpreted to underlie the area. So we drilled this hole a little bit to the east of the 2003 hole, and essentially what we intersected was primarily intermediate to mafic volcanic rocks. They are not tufaceous, they are crystalline, and they are porphyritic, containing very fine plagioclase laths and altered pyroxenes. And we do see like a significant amount of veining in them. The previous slide showed some quartz veining with our basically chalcopyrite and arsenopyrite. This particular vein is at a very low angle to the core axis, but others at a higher angle. So we've got structural measurements and all these things, and are able to plot up stair nets and try to understand the structural setting of them. And on the next slide, you can see a similar rock type, with a significantly higher vein density, and we also see like bleaching and alteration of the volcanic rocks, like in these areas of stronger vein development.
Okay, let's open up the floor to any questions or comments on any of that. Please raise your hand if you have a question, or enter it into the chat. And while we wait for any questions to come forward, let's quickly go to Trent, back to the core shack. And Trent, you want to walk us through some new core before we get into sort of the end of the presentation here?
Yep, we can do that. Well, one thing is that we're drilling on Chicken Mountain.
I'm sorry, was that a question, Trent?
No, we are drilling on Chicken Mountain.
Yeah, we are drilling. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. More of that systematic drilling to get to that main inferred resource. So we're drilling right through some of the kind of core areas that we have known mineralization through like the quartz monzonites. But we found out, like, through the years of 2023 drilling, just it's a broad area where we're drilling from, but there's this zone of just grucified rock at the top, and then just to optimize our drilling is that we've pre-collar or collar the hole is in PQ, and then we have a lot of better success and drilling rates by doing so. Early in in 2023, what we found out was that we'd have some issues with early in the holes where we setting casing. This is some of these methods that we've used in Nevada. So what we end up doing is collaring the hole in PQ so they can really get down to fairly competent rock. What we'd see here, this hole at the top of Chicken Mountain, collared in these monzonites and quartz monzonites. Right here we have biotite monzonite, fairly altered, and then we get through this kind of rubbly zone. Here we'd see, here are our orientation lines. We get into the monzonites as we go down the hole. And this is early on where we start to see these little tags indicate some of these mineralized veins and veinlets that we see. Again, we see fairly, oxidized zones where as we go down towards like 80 to 100 meters, and this is what we're kind of looking at. These areas, we're still identifying veins as we log this. We get out of the upper oxidized zone. And here we go. And here are these getting in these quartz monzonites. See these veins, kind of fracture zones, but increased fractures as as we kind of go through and log these. Do we have I'll grab the Struckmaster. One of the things that we do that I mentioned earlier is that we have a new tool by our downhole tool company, is that we do instant orientation logging with what's called the Struckmaster, and it's by a company called Stockholm Precision Tooling. I'll just really do a quick little demo of it. I'll grab we'll just do it on, we have an orientation line. Grab anything over there. All right. So grab just anything on there. If you guys can see this, this is a new tool that SBT revealed at EDAC last year. And you end up doing these little modifications. And say if we're seeing a veinlet, fracture, fault, contact, you do these little traces of that. Kind of give it what the vein is. So you give it a depth as well, and that's how we've been capturing a lot of structural data. Again, we still do alphas and betas based off that orientation line, but this gives us a very fast and efficient way to collect structural data, and on the fly we can sync it with our downhole surveys, and we get true dip and dip direction immediately. And so we can see something like this where on this drill hole we have identified the different veins and veinlets, quartz sulfide, carbonate, quartz carbonate. And this is just one of the tools we're implementing to get real-time data quickly to help us if we need to pivot based on if we're seeing different patterns in the structural fabrics or orientations. Is there anything specific that as we're kind of going along, people can chime in to let me know if there's something that kind of piques your interest? As we kind of just rock around here, one of the last things we'll do, this is our core photo booth. So after we log, do all the meter marks and all the structural sampling, we bring it here before cutting. And this is so we get good, consistent core photos like the ones that you see in this presentation. But we just systematically go through this in a systematic way for the logging. Other than that, this is a drill hole that we're still working on, so I don't know if we can. We don't have too much data on it yet. Is there anything that you see, Tony, that you want me to point out?
No, I would just also add that we do XRF analysis. Feel free to shoot the rock if you want, or a vein,
Yeah.
as more of a educational, not necessarily informative exercise. But this is also part of our logging, is that we will XRF, and the XRF is, it's not a definitive tool. It is an indicator of a potential indicator, I should say, of what sort of multi-element minerals we're dealing with. And so to that point, he has the XRF gun, which is shooting, I think it looks like a vein or fracture there. And
yeah, there's a fracture with some very fine grained sulfides on it. Each test can last from 75 or 70 to 90 seconds.
Yeah. So once we get our actual assays from the laboratory, we'll marry that to the core photos or to the core. We'll do our XRF analysis, and we can start building a potential proxy for indications of mineralization, where you get more confident in your ability to predict, is this mineralized? You won't get necessarily grade predictions, but you can say mineralized versus non-mineralized, and establish some sort of confidence around that. But that does take time, and the more comprehensive and robust the database is, the better you can get sort of at that. And sometimes that can take, a couple of years, or just, you're refining it as you go. So there's another tool that we utilize to get a sense of what we're dealing with. And as Trent's showing, you can see there's, what is there? I can't see myself. Lead. Yeah, you can see the minerals, arsenic,
sulfur.
Yeah.
And
the
Tony.
reading.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
But this is, again, not laboratory quality. Just to be very clear, it's a rough indicator. So with that being said, if there's we'll go to the last slide here, and we'll wrap things up. I will share my screen just to close things off here. And again, here we are. Yes. Okay. So we wrapped up the drill core presentation. Again, this is phase 1. Phase 2 has been kicked off. What's next for Tectonic? Hopefully drill results in the very short term here. We want to establish some context. We don't want to report partial holes. These will be complete holes. We do anticipate getting gold assays. We are doing photon assaying on the drill core. And then once that's received or completed, we then do the multi-element at a different facility. We do anticipate drill results here hopefully in the month of September, and then there'll be continuous drill results right through till the end of the year. Phase 2 is going to be going right through till the end of the season, and I probably anticipate that phase 2 drill results may trickle in this year, and also will trickle into Q1 of next year. We will also, in the first part, Q1, Q2, depending on when assays are received, we'll then take those drill core samples that were drilled to collect metallurgical samples. We'll be then formulating our 2-inch column testing. That is not the only crush size that we'll be flirting with. We'll be doing other comprehensive metallurgical testing at different crush sizes. The objective of that testing is to, again, inch our way towards potential run of mine. You can do that by doing various tests. You plot that on a graph and chart, and then you can sort of get confidence or a predictive ability to where your recoveries will be. Once we get those column test results, we will then kick off our 2026 drilling. And the objective there would be to work towards that maiden inferred mineral resource estimate that will be then married to a PEA. And then from there, we'll move things forward to either PFS or FS and continue to march this project towards development. Chicken Mountain right now is the anchor, but we do anticipate drill results from other potential intrusion targets that may or may not trump Chicken Mountain. Chicken Mountain has seen the bulk of drilling, whether historical or tectonic drilling. It is home base right now, but we do have a lot of confidence and excitement that these other targets, Alpha Bull, which is an extension of Chicken Mountain, Golden Apex, Black Creek, and Gem, and there are other intrusion targets that we haven't even got to that we do think have the potential to be just as exciting as Chicken Mountain. So with that being said, this is the end of the presentation. I will open up the floor to any Q&A before we end things off. If there are questions, either raise your hand or submit them in the chat, and Jesse will facilitate that.
Yeah, so Mark has a question, Mark Smith. He wants to know how this year's Alpha Bull rocks compare to last year's results.
Last year's results being
The rock type comparison between what we're seeing in the Alpha Bull rocks this
Yeah.
year and what we saw last year in 2024.
I could take that one.
Oh, go ahead, Pete. Yeah.
Yeah. So last year's drilling was all RC. But I can say that for the most part, the rocks intersected last year are comparable to the rocks intersected this year, being sort of that coarser grained monzonite to cyanomonzonite for the most part. There were a few geochemically distinct units in some of last year's drilling, but fairly limited. We've yet to understand their distribution, where the rocks start to evolve more towards the Chicken Mountain composition. So there's always the opportunity, perhaps to find another one of these, leucocratic quartz monzonite late stage centers within the Alpha Bowl.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you,
Pete.
Pete.
A question from Wesley. Based on the drilling results to date, does Chicken Mountain resemble a Fort Knox or other type of deposit?
Pete, feel free to jump in. For those that don't know, the initial drilling actually done at Flat was by the same company, Fairbanks Gold, that advanced Fort Knox. So this was in the mid 80s. To add context that, we believe they were trying to find another Fort Knox. Flat does tick a lot of boxes that make it sort of the best analog. Pete, jump in. Chicken Mountain itself, from based on what we're seeing and what we know, it does resemble Fort Knox. Again, that would be the closest analog that we can associate it with. Are other reduced intrusion-related gold deposits similar? Yes. I always use the analogy that if we're a part of the same family, I have two sisters. We all carry the same last name. We are, blood, but in the same breath, we are different. And from my experience in the mineral and mining space is that deposits can be part of a family, but they are all unique and different. We do see things that are very much like Fort Knox. We do see things that are perhaps like other reduced intrusion-related gold deposits. And then we see things like at Golden Apex and Black Creek that are slightly different. Pete, if you have anything, or Rich or anyone else on the team want to add to that commentary.
Yeah, very, very quickly. I mean, I think one of the characteristics of Fort Knox is both the presence of, these sheeted veins carrying gold, but also like more shear zones, that kind of cross-cutting the system. And like at Chicken Mountain itself, it appears to be more, controlled by the sheeted veins, but we are starting to see more like presence of shear zones or structural zones that are in there as well. So I'd say it's probably the closest analog that we have, to a productive mine would be Fort Knox.
Okay, and as a follow-up question from Leo Fraga, The intense sericite potassic halos and brecciated veins evoke the zoned alteration in tintina, intrusion-related gold deposits like Fort Knox, where such features signal proximity to high-grade feeders. With the telescoping evident in your cores, what structural data from the oriented drilling is guiding your targeting for phase 2, and how optimistic are you about uncovering additional high-intensity veining corridors?
Pete?
Good, good. I mean, great question. I don't know how to answer that. Certainly, we. I'll back up and say, at Chicken Mountain in this phase 2 drilling, we are drilling like sectionally, and really trying to get a density of data which will allow us to better track both the mineralization and structural features and lithological features throughout the system. I mean, a lot of the historic drilling was sparse. It was in numerous orientations, and it's proven difficult using that to really put a coherent picture together. So I think the best answer I can give for that is we're going to let the drill holes answer that question. Like, we don't know everything, and that systematic drilling really allows us to sort of assess how this thing is stacked up, and how best to vector some of that drilling towards potentially higher grade or more densely veined sections.
I would just jump in and also add that, we obviously put our best foot forward, whether, collating all the geological data that we have, including the structural data, things that you mentioned there, Leo. And then in addition to that, we canvassed the team to put our best foot forward on drill collar locations. And then regardless of what gold system I or my team has worked on, there's always going to be twists and turns and surprises. And there is some drilling that we've done this year that, we thought perhaps we're on the periphery of something. Maybe not the best target, but let's just cover it off with an RC fence. And we're pleasantly surprised by what we're seeing in the rocks. And so, you can do all the work that you want, but I do believe that, what I love about this system is that, we're continually hitting gold. Yes, sometimes it's lower grade gold, but we have, 86 drill holes that have gone into this thing at Chicken Mountain. Every hole has gold, and we're continuing to see just this pervasive gold. So where's that higher grade gold? We put a drill hole at Alpha Bowl last year. Did we know it was going to come back with 21 grams, 67 grams? We no, we the answer is, we put our best foot forward and said, let's put a drill hole here. And yes, we did hit gold. Did we know the tenor was going to be that spectacular? No, not necessarily. And so, I think we are confident that we can find these things, but we're also confident and humble enough to say, we don't know everything, and drilling will tell all. And sometimes, speaking to a couple Fort Knox folk, they kind of pulled their hair out trying to figure things out. And in the end, it does become a drilling exercise where the high grade will ultimately get flushed out with more systematic drilling. Trent, feel free to jump in there.
Yeah, okay. No, like just following up on that systematic drilling, is that we are sending these things out for all our samples out for assays right away, and geochem analyses after the fact. But once we identify those zones and corridors, or at least some of these interesting geochemical patterns, we also have kind of ideas for doing like TerraSpec or any other kind of play analysis, and looking through alteration zones to look for intensities of these other corridors that somewhat fall outside the kind of the just assays and geochemical data that we're getting. And we can do that, off season, and these are some things that we're targeting to do to follow up on just some of these patterns that we're seeing from the systematic drilling.
Okay, great, Trent, Tony. We have another question from Wesley. Given the location of the potential mine, logistics will be a high hurdle to development, though not as high as Donlin since your deposit isn't refractory. If you develop a 5 million ounce resource, how do you foresee the logistics of building a mill and power facility at such a remote location?
Okay, I guess I can tackle that one. Um, I've had if anyone who's worked in the north or somewhere off grid, typically faces a question like this, and it's a great question. We asked this question as part of our project acquisition due diligence. We plant a hypothetical mine in this area. We did this at Flat. What does it take to move the dial and move this thing forward? At the Kaminak with Kaminak Gold Corporation and the Coffee Gold Project, we had the exact same question arise, and we ended up selling that for 520 million, and had three major mining companies come after us. There was a lot of people that, how can you do this? How can you do this? Blah, blah, blah. What I can say about this project is that it actually has better infrastructure and access to infrastructure than our Kaminak Coffee Gold project. We would obviously benefit from Donlin moving forward, but being a heap leach or free milling opportunity, we have way different power requirements. And to break that down even further is that when we did our metallurgical testing at Flat, what I'd love to see from a mine development perspective is that we have multiple paths going forward on how to process that gold. It can be free milling, it can be flotation, gravity, it can be heap leach. This is preliminary nature, so I will issue my cautionary forward-looking statement that, based on the metallurgical data we have, we can make certain assumptions, but they are assumptions, and more data, more testing will make that definitive, which you get in your PFS or feasibility study. But as a heap leach opportunity, we have way less equipment required that needs to be brought in. You're building a heap leach pad, and then the crushing. The reason why we're so adamant about doing this metallurgical testing is because crushing is 50% of your all-in sustaining cost. Just think about the crushing a rock down to a point where it is required to liberate the gold, and less crushing, less equipment, less energy. This could be a diesel. This would be, if Donlin doesn't move forward, a diesel operation. You can look at small nuclear plants. You can look at LNG. Those studies have yet to be kicked off, but generally speaking, the less crushing, the more or higher probability your project can be economic. Power, like as I mentioned, diesel. A lot of gold mines aren't located next to a road or next to a power grid. They operate via diesel, and this has been the way for years and decades, if you will. So what we envision is that if you can get to that 5 million ounce threshold, if you can get to a low energy consumption production scenario, such as heap leaching, and ultimately grade, and more specifically margin. Grade is only one aspect, but when you look at margin and heap leach mines, we have a slide in our presentation that demonstrate 0.4 or 0.5 gram per ton projects can demonstrate $1,300 all-in sustaining costs, extremely profitable operations. So we've done our analysis, and we believe Flat has what it takes to be a tier one deposit, and also has what it takes to be a low cost opportunity. And so that's the data that we have in front of us, giving us the confidence to continue advancing this project. Any other questions or comments?
We have one from Steve Clark. When it comes to heap leaching, do oxides and sulfides have to be milled or treated differently?
Okay. Well, I think the first thing and feel free to jump in, anyone else on my team, but the first thing to note is that based again on the data that we have, so this is the multi-element data and the metallurgical data. This is a very low sulfur system. We're seeing less than 1% sulfur. And when we've done our metallurgical column testing, we didn't necessarily discriminate between oxide and non-oxide or fresh material. Everything went into that column. And again, we got very robust recoveries. If we look at the Fort Knox mine as a case study, the gold at Fort Knox and gold at Flat is fracture controlled. What does that mean? Well, the gold is situated along these fractures, which gives the cyanide solution the ability to access the gold easily and allows the gold to be liberated very easily. So oxidization or potential sulfidization doesn't necessarily limit or impact greatly the ability for the gold to be recovered via heap leach. So we've seen that at the Fort Knox operation, and our initial testing is supporting that as well. So we don't necessarily envision something to be treated, the oxides and potential low sulfides to be treated differently. Now, the other caveat that is worth noting is that the data or the testing that we've done has been only on Chicken Mountain. We haven't done this work at other intrusion targets, such as Alpha Bull, Golden Apex. Would they have a different processing path forward? Possibly. And we'll have to deal with that as it comes forward. But typically, sulfides are present in varying amounts in a lot of gold systems, and they can be processed. And based on the recovery rates, sometimes like Fort Knox, they treat their higher grade material, and higher grade at Fort Knox is 0.85. 0.85 gets sent to the mill, 0.3 and lower goes to the pad. And there's enough an arbitrage there to warrant back, at least back then, building that mill and moving that forward. And again, we may see that here at Flat, but we need to do that economic trade-off study based on metallurgical data to support that. And the good news is that everything, at least whether oxide, sulfide, everything is free milling based on the data that we've done to date. The testing that we've done to date, sorry. If Pete, you have anything you want to add on that, or anyone else?
No, I think covered it well, Tony. Yeah.
There's a couple other questions there, Jesse, I think.
There's one more question here, and a comment. The question from Ronnie is, what is most positive visualizing the drill core is the most, what's the most positive visual aspect of the drill core?
Well, visible gold is always a good one. Although all of us that have been in the space drilling, visible gold sometimes can be disappointing, but that is definitely the best indicator of gold is gold. For me, I think I mentioned this earlier. What I really like about this year's drill campaign is that we're collecting geological data, whether structural or visual. We're seeing things that we haven't seen before, and will all feed into the puzzle of Flat. So I love the fact that we're seeing thicker veining, more veining. I love the fact that we're seeing tourmaline. This pinkish vein that we're seeing. I mean, to me, that's very interesting. What does that mean? Is it associated with more gold? The jury is still out until we get assay results. But I guess if I were to answer that, visible gold is definitely visible gold, more veining, and thicker veining is something that I find exciting and intriguing. And Pete or Trent or anyone else on my team, would you like to elaborate a bit further on that?
I think for myself, what I like to see is when you always get the sheeted early sort of quartz veining in there at reasonable densities. That to me is, I think one of the key drivers of some of the potential higher grades within the system. One thing I will say, I mean, I've looked at all, as much of the core as possible from this system, and sometimes it can be a little bit humbling as to what returns good assays versus what you think is going to return good assays. So visuals do have a place, but ultimately it comes down to the truth machine, which is the assays, and then following up on that and trying to figure out why that's the case.
Yeah, I think the first thing that when we were given the ability to view and relog the historical drill core from 1985 to 2003, the first thing I said is show me the 200 grammer. One of the historical holes returned 200 grams per ton plus over a meter, and you went to that drill core and you were kind of scratching your head a bit. It looked like it was mineralized, but you didn't, so what I get the takeaway is, to Pete's point, it can be quite humbling to see what runs and what doesn't run. It can be quite surprising. And there are these subtleties in these systems being these reduced intrusion related gold systems, that you're questioning yourself, can this thing run? And I go back to the notion with heap leach that even a half gram, typically in half gram per ton heap leach gold systems, that's enough to get you excited. And obviously we love higher grade, but we can't discount that a half gram per ton can be very economic, especially when you're dealing with heap leach, coarse crush, potential run of mine.
We've got another question from David Hahn. By reading the release, it seems like bismuth element is not as high and impressive. Would that be a concern to your geologist team?
I can take that one.
Okay.
Like typically, bismuth is present. Bismuth, tellurium are present, and show a very, very high correlation coefficient with gold, within like the core of this system. Typically, bismuth contents, the absolute abundance, if you start seeing 10 ppm bismuth and 1 or 2 ppm tellurium, you're going to sort of get a commensurate amount of gold with that. So it's not necessarily a concern that the bismuth is not in the thousands of ppm at all. Its relative abundance is low, but the correlation with gold is very, very good within those sort of core high temperature veins.
Thank you, Pete. Okay, maybe one more question, or are we, actually, you know what, let's maybe just wrap it up here. I'm just looking at the clock. What I will suggest is that if there are any other questions, feel free to email them to us. We will do our best to address your questions from today or any future questions. My email, tony@tectonicmetals.com. We have info@tectonicmetals.com if it's more of a general question. Investor relations @tectonicmetals.com as well. Feel free to reach out with any questions or comments you may have. I want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your workday to attend the presentation and learn a bit more. We're also open to feedback. This was our first ever. If you have suggestions, we welcome them, always welcome them. We obviously want to put the best product possible going forward. And we thought this would be, a step in the right direction as far as bringing something new to the junior mining space, let's just say. Thank you to my team, our team, the Tectonic team, from directors to advisors. I'm really thankful and honored to have you on this journey with me. I also would be remiss if I didn't thank our shareholders, each and every one of you, from the Crest Cats to our native partner, Doing Unlimited, to each individual shareholder that has made an investment into this company and entrusted us with your capital. We take that very seriously, and we are humbled and honored that you have taken this leap of faith and seeing how this project unfolds and seeing how Tectonic evolves, if you will. So a very deep thank you from the entire Tectonic team. We do anticipate drill results in very short order here, and extremely excited what this drill core will yield in the coming weeks, months, as we sort of connect the dots and the puzzle pieces to this flat gold system. So thank you, everyone. If there's any parting comments from my team, feel free to jump in. But wanted to thank you for your time and dedication and investment in Tectonic. Thank you.